Okay, well, good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everyone this morning. We're out here at the campus of UCLA for our first ever sports betting forum, where we'll be talking about the future impact of sports betting on California. My name is Dr. Timothy Fong. I'm a professor of psychiatry. I, along with Dr. Richard Rosenthal, are the co-directors of the UCLA Gambling Studies Program. And it is our absolute pleasure and delight to invite people here in person as well as out there in virtual land for an open discussion this morning about sports betting, what we know, what we think we know, and what we need to know moving forward. So clearly, this is a fascinating time in our state's history in terms of our election next week. And we thought it would be a perfect time for us to have this forum to bring some minds together and ideas and discussions and really lay out what the core issues are about sports betting in California and how it will impact our state today and moving forward. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. And for those of you online, at any time, please feel free to throw a question, a comment into the Q&A box. We'll make sure it gets addressed. We have I'd say about maybe an hour and a half of good material, and the rest of it is really meant for us in the audience to communicate, to interact in this completely modern age way of hybrid conferencing via Zoom. I am looking at, no kidding, 4 different screens right now. So it's a little bit like Captain Kirk on Star Trek. So normally I just shout out orders and someone follows it, but in this case, I'll be navigating, firing the weapons and fending off the Klingons at the same time. So, all right, so let's move forward. With that, there's our agenda. We have an amazing panel. We have 2 of our panelists are here in person, myself, and then Brianne Doer is here. And then online, joining us at 11, we'll have I. Nelson Rose and Robert Jacobson. And of course, we have our audience participating as well. So what we have here today, I have about half an hour to go over and lay out the landscape of sports betting in California. I have a little bit, some things on history, some of the things that we've seen in clinical experiences over the last 2-3 years. Then we're going to open up our panel where each of our panelists is going to talk about some of their expertise as it relates to sports betting, and particularly with a focus on what California should be doing over the next few years as sports betting expands. We have a short break. And we might even keep that very short since we have a lot of folks online. We don't want to lose folks online. And then we have an open forum where we're all going to be discussing and bringing up ideas. And ultimately, the idea is that we'll take what we talk about here today, use that as a roadmap moving forward to address sports betting here in California. So we're going to cover what we've seen, what we know, what we are seeing right now as clinicians, as educators, as advocates, as community engagement, as researchers, and we'll talk again about what we need to do. What we won't talk about is how to vote. I get that a lot from the media, say, Dr. Fong, how are you going to vote? Up or down? And I come to realize, you know what, that is an absolute personal decision. I'm not going to tell people how I'm going to vote, but I think by the information we talk about here today will help shape people's knowledge and attitudes, and ultimately you will vote. That's the key, that everyone does vote. All right, so let me just start with a case example to kind of lay the ground of kind of the things that we are seeing right now today in the various clinics as we see sports betting expand. And this is Greg. Greg is 39. He's a male who's been a patient of mine since well before the start of the pandemic. And originally he came to see me for alcohol use disorder combined with anxiety disorder. He had generalized and socialized anxiety disorder, but no gambling, no other substance use. He responded very well to medications for the alcohol, for psychotherapy, 12-step support. He did very, very well in recovery. His recovery story was remarkable. He maintained his job, he maintained his marriage, he did very well, no return to drinking. He moved to New York before the pandemic and settled into a new career in advertising, making north of $250,000 a year. He started a family, gave birth to a son, and he and his wife moved into a house somewhere in the suburbs of New York. And because he had difficulty finding a new psychiatrist, we still did things remotely, and I would meet with him every few months to talk about medications, his alcohol recovery, parenting, all the things that make the work that we do really, really worthwhile. Then New York launches online sports betting in January 2022. Brianne, how much money did they handle within that first month in January 2022? It was like $1 billion. $1 billion handled month one. Greg starts playing sports betting online during the NFL playoffs and the Super Bowl. He's always been interested in sports. He likes sports. He said, this is interesting. Ads are everywhere. I'm going to start doing this. He starts off spending $40 to $80 per week on single bets, meaning he's just betting winner versus loser. He's not doing any quote exotic bets, teasers, or parlays. And he watches the games that he bets on. His wife is kind of aware that Greg is doing this. Again, it's legal, it's above board. She knows he's watching the games. She's watching the games with him. They're not talking about how much are you spending. March Madness comes around a few months later, and then the baseball season starts in April. He begins to casually bet a little more because there's constant drumbeat of different offers, enticements, opportunities. People in his office are starting to talk more and more about, hey, did you get action in on the game? Who do you like in tonight's matchup? He bets what's called a 5-leg parlay, where he made one bet and 5 separate outcomes had to occur for him to win that bet. So he put in, I think it was like $25, and he ended up coming back with a $2,500. It was a big win, a big surge of dopamine, surge of adrenaline, surge of reward. And after that, that set him off to say, hey, I want to do this more frequently. I can enjoy it. This is really fun. I'm going to make more money. And everything increases. He started betting more frequently. The amounts that he bets goes up $100, $150, $200 a day. The betting types become more varied, not just straight bets on one game. Things that we would call in-game parlays and teasers and points and other things, and exotics that those who are not familiar with sports betting have not heard about. But he says it's just really exciting. It's adding to the quality of my life. By August, and this is now 7 months after he's placed his first bet legally in a New York online sports betting casino, he's spent, or is it he's lost? That's the interesting verbiage. We, of course, would say lost. He said, I spent his $2,500 that he originally won from his parlay, and then now he's put in $5,000 of his own money. It's a total of $7,500 he's spent on this platform. But unfortunately, it's also led him to do a few things that he's never, ever done before. Lying to his wife about the money, lying to his wife about his gambling, chasing losses, meaning trying to get back his losses from the internet. He's thinking about gambling all the time in a really intense way, not in a positive way, like, oh, I can't wait for tonight's game. It's like, oh my gosh, I need tonight's game to come in. He's not able to cut down. He says, you know what, I'm not going to do this anymore. This is bad. And he's really anxious. So this is just a classic story, right? 7 months later, by September 2022, his wife discovers the $7,500 that have been spent, and her trust is shattered in this. And she even said to me, I almost wish he just cheated on me with another woman. I could deal with that. I cannot deal with him lying about money. It's something that really triggered him. Their very strong relationship essentially almost crumbled overnight. His pain about the $7,500 he spent, and the lying and the shame of the lying, that's what led him to near suicidality. And unfortunately, his alcohol came back. All this in the span of a couple of weeks. Now, he didn't tell me any of this until our last 30 seconds of our appointment in September. So I said, well, how you doing? I'm not doing so great. The stress of work, I have gone back to drinking. He didn't say to me, despite my sign in my background saying Gambling Studies Program. He didn't say to me, finally, the last 30 seconds, you know what, Dr. Fong, I got to tell you something. I've been gambling. I said, Greg, I've known you for 2.5 years with a strong connection. How come you didn't tell me earlier? I was so ashamed. I was so afraid that you would be upset with me. I couldn't believe that it happened to me under your care, because we've talked about this before. Bring that up. This is a real case. And I think about how many of these cases are happening every day in America. First, Greg's mindset about gambling is really interesting. Initially, it wasn't an escape, right? He was doing it for dopamine, doing it for action, for entertainment, also a little bit to make money. But he also said further along into it, he really liked the idea of showing off this knowledge of sports to other people, like competition, that thrive. And that's a different, unique aspect of gambling on sports that we don't see in other forms. The chasing losses wasn't to cover his money but it was to get money back from this faceless corporation that he believed took his money. He personalized the losses. He didn't say, you know what, that was the cost of entertainment. I lost, or I spent $200 to bet on my team. He said, no, these corporations took it from me. It was an affront. And it was interesting to hear that. We hear that, from time to time from gamblers, of course, but the intensity, that's what drove him to continue the chase. I bring this up a little bit more because the unique areas of this, his vulnerabilities. Yes, he had alcohol use disorder, so we know he had a genetic predisposition for other gambling disorder. But what about the environment he was now living in? The fact that when he woke up in New York, January 2022, everywhere he looked was an ad for gambling. Everywhere he went, someone was talking about the lines. That had to have an impact. What could have been done to prevent this? What could have been said in January, February, or March to have prevent Greg from developing that condition worsening up? What could he have done to sought help sooner? Is there anything that we could have actually said that he would have opened up and said, yes, I actually been gambling more? And now when we get to the sports betting treatment, are we going to use the same tried and true principles we do for all other men and women with gambling disorder, or are we going to have to do things a little bit differently? So that's a snapshot of a story, and I really wanted to bring that up because it really highlights, I think, some of the modern day issues that we're going to face with gambling and sports betting. So let me pause on that. I'm going to go to the California story before we turn it over to some of our folks in the panel. And our story in California is fascinating. Dr. Rosenthal has been doing work in gambling disorders since the 80s. I've been doing work since I met him in 2001. So I've been doing it for 20 years. Our UCLA Gambling Studies Program has opened its doors in 2005. I really want to highlight a few things that we've learned and a few things that we know about gambling currently. Our last statewide prevalence data was 2006, nearly 16 years ago. It's not been repeated at the same level, still one of the largest statewide prevalence surveys ever, really highlighting lifetime problem or pathological gambling, again, older terms, 3.7%. Does anyone remember 2006? I certainly don't remember 2006. Who was president? That was Bush, right? That was Bush, 16 years ago. Past year pathological gambling DSM-4 criteria. That means 1.3% of our state of California met criteria within the last year for pathological gambling or gambling disorder. This is 2006. We don't know what those numbers are in 2022, do we? We've had now 13 years of state-funded treatment. We've had PSAs, we had more attention. We don't know if that number is higher or lower. So that's an interesting thing. But we do know that the highest risk categories back then still exist today. African-American, people of color, disabled, physical or mental disabilities, unemployed, and men. So that was 2006. Current state 2022, and I pulled this information off last night from our California Gaming Commission. We're still the #1 nation in America in terms of gambling revenue. Card rooms, 84 licensed, about 1,700 tables, 84 licenses. That means about 84 brick and mortar buildings in the state of California. With the lottery, and I didn't realize this, $8 billion in sales in 2021. So that's a tremendous amount, with a significant portion, about $6 billion of those sales. It's not Powerball or Mega Millions, it's scratchers. Tribal casinos, we have 62 casinos in our state of California. Horse racing, have offline or off track with in-person. And I think we oftentimes forget, we still have had for several years online horse racing betting through TVG. Now, I have not seen any patients in the last 5 years that have had any horse racing issues, but we know it's out there, and we know that there's a segment of the population still today playing online horse racing betting. So we already have sports betting in California online via the horse racing. And again, people oftentimes forget we have legalized daily fantasy sports in California. Shane and Brad in the audience, treatment providers, have either of you seen any daily fantasy sports players come into treatment? Not a lot, but we know it's there. The evolution of daily fantasy sports is not just one or two operators. We now have several operators that offer daily fantasy sports. And Brianna and I were looking at one last night that looks very similar to what you would do for a standard parlay, not like the traditional daily fantasy sports. So that's what we have currently in California. Put it all together, that total revenue is going to be north of $15 billion a year in gross revenues. And here's a slide from our American Gaming Association talking about California's home to not only tribal operators, but gaming suppliers, and a vibrant industry of well over 100,000 people that are working, 82 unique casino gaming locations with huge economic impact. So we know this, we feel this. And then the question always is, what will happen when sports betting emerges? What happens when we add either brick and mortar sports betting, mobile sports betting, kiosk sports betting, more sports betting inside the lottery, all sorts of interesting questions. But what do we know from our state treatment program right now? And in a short while, you'll hear from Robin Christensen from our state program. But for those of you who don't know, we have a state-funded program, no-cost treatment for gambling disorder clients, as well as affected individuals, meaning friends or family, called CalGets, accessible through 1-800-GAMBLER. And we learned a few things. I want to highlight a few things that we learned related to sports betting right now, before we even see expansion. We're so proud of this. This is a statewide no-cost treatment program in operation since 2009. We have a wide variety of treatment services from helpline, 1-800-GAMBLER, outpatient providers, over 160 outpatient providers, intensive outpatient programs in San Diego through UPAC, and in Los Angeles through Betshuva's Right Action program, and a vibrant residential treatment program at Betshuva's Right Action program. All that funded by our state Office of Problem Gambling, all that made possible by the work that many of us do to advocate for those resources. We also supply group treatment, separate facilitated treatment for gambling disorder clients that's unique from 12-step. Telehealth, that means every single person in California that has a secure internet has the ability to receive no-cost treatment. When we first started back in 2009, that was really pivotal for us to do it. We never foresaw telehealth, and here we are. That means anyone who calls the helpline today can call and get a telehealth appointment, usually within 2 or 3 business days. I think that's absolutely remarkable. And annually, we see anywhere between 7 to 1,000 gamblers, men and women with gambling disorder every year, and about 300 to 500 affected individuals. But we know, against that backdrop of how many potential hundreds of thousands of men and women with gambling disorder, it's a very small percentage. So we definitely want to expand our reach, our efforts, and our treatment networks. But what do you know about folks currently in 2022 coming into CalGets with sports betting issues? We know that across all the types of gambling, when we ask our gambling clients, what type of gambling is giving you the most difficulty and harm? Slot machines, blackjack, poker, and then sports betting is number 4. Sports betting is number 4. It's not number 3, it's not number 1, not number 8, it's number 4. In a state that, as of today, traditionally the only form of is daily fantasy sports or betting on online horse racing as the legal forms. What do we know even more about those sports bettors? On here in this slide, and you can see, diving on a little bit, that sports bettors who come into treatment and CalGets, they started gambling younger at age 16. They started to have signs of gambling disorder younger at age 24. They also came into treatment younger as well at age 39. So again, all of these trends are the things that we want to take and learn from to understand, how do we reach these folks younger? And this again in the backdrop at age 16, right as we're starting to see a flood of gambling ads targeted toward young people. So I have a 17-year-old and a 13-year-old son. They don't know a world. Isn't that interesting? They do not know a world where ESPN does not show betting lines. They do not know a world where they can drive around and not see betting ads. Our son, who's a hockey player, on the very rink he skates in with all his young friends, there are gambling ads right on the boards. So it's embedded in his psyche. So I think that's a very interesting, because they are absolutely the first generation not only to have sports betting, but have sports betting literally in front of them for the day that they're born. All right, so with that, we are now going to turn into the fancy portion of our segment, and give me a second here to figure this out. Robin Christensen is the chief of the Substance and Addiction Prevention Branch for the Center for a Healthy Community, the California Department of Public Health. She has been a staunch advocate for the work we've been doing in the Office of Problem Gambling. She is here live. Let's see. Robin, can you hear us?
I can hear you. How about you? Can you hear me?
We can hear you. I'm going to do this. and then I'm going to highlight you. Robin, go ahead and take it away with a few words for our live audience as well as our virtual audience. Tell us about yourself, what you do there in Sacramento, and some kind words you have for us moving forward.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having us here today. My name is Robin Christensen. I'm the chief of the Substance and Addiction Prevention Branch, and I had desperately wanted to be there in person, but I came down with a cold this week. So I am meeting with you virtually today to share a little bit of information about our branch and our program here at the Office of Problem Gambling. So I am joined here today in the audience by some of our staff, including the Office of Problem Gambling Chief, Sasha Marasigan-Quintero, who is the brand new leader of the Office of Problem Gambling, which is dedicated to promoting the awareness and prevention of gambling disorder and making treatment widely available to all of who are negatively impacted by gambling behavior, such as both the problem gambler themselves and also the affected individuals in their lives, their family members, their loved ones, the people that may be affected by the impacts of problem gambling behaviors. The program, Office of Problem Gambling, provides training related to the treatment of gambling disorder for counselors and therapists throughout the state of California through its landmark problem gambling treatment program, which Tim has referred to already, CalGETS, our California Gambling Education and Treatment Services Program. This is our statewide program. As I said, it provides training. It also provides treatment for clients with gambling disorder and for the affected individuals. Treatment services are available to any California resident age 18 and over at no cost to the client. And oversight of the program is conducted not only by the California Office of Problem Gambling within the Department of Public Health, but it's done in partnership with UCLA Gambling Studies Program. We have been providing treatment services since 2009, and in that time, we've supported over 17,000 people who've been affected by gambling disorder. Each person with problem gambling behaviors has the potential for social and economic impacts to their families, to their employers, and to their communities. And our treatment program serves a range of services for the client, and that includes both outpatient, inpatient, intensive outpatient, and also group treatment services. But we are much more than just a treatment program. We also provide research-driven gambling disorder prevention and education to mitigate some of those negative impacts of gambling disorders on communities. And we aim to raise awareness of gambling disorder, which is frequently a hidden and misunderstood disease. Our prevention program includes a helpline, training and technical assistance, and public awareness campaigns, and we do continue to research the prevalence of problem gambling across our state. So we have reached thousands of Californians over the years. We've provided some critical, life-changing treatment, and we've helped to raise awareness of this disease. Under Sasha's leadership, the office has identified 3 key priorities, and we can think of these as some of the strategic drivers of our work over the next several years. We are aiming to practice cultural and linguistic inclusion. We're working to bridging with wellness best practices, and we're leaning into technology. As Tim pointed out, the telehealth has been a major revolution in terms of our ability to offer services, and we're looking to expand similar technological advancements throughout our program. These priorities align really well with our overall department strategies for quality improvement and for expanding behavioral health services under the realm of public health. Within my branch, the Substance and Addiction Prevention Branch, we have 4 core areas, and the Office of Problem Gambling is one of the key pillars within our branch. We also serve overdose prevention work, youth cannabis prevention work, and we have an alcohol harms prevention initiative. All of our programs share a common set of approaches, which include research, it includes policy systems and environmental change, building stakeholder relationships, partnerships, and local capacity, and expanding upon our public awareness and communications. Our work shares common principles related to equity and justice, harm reduction, and lifting up some of the best and promising practices. We really aim to think about the whole person in the experience and context of their family, society, community, neighborhood, their lived experience, because we know that we need to look beyond the metrics of addiction or overdose or whatever diagnosis somebody may be labeled with. Our branch was established in 2020 with a goal of reducing harm from addiction and substance use through this research-driven prevention, education, and treatment. And our programs have been intentionally designed to create some of that synergy and opportunities for collaboration and alignment. And I have to say, one of the reasons for the formation of our branch is our department's commitment to behavioral health. And the Office of Problem Gambling in many ways is a prime example of how we can bridge behavioral health with the public health approach. I'm really grateful for the space here, Tim, where allowing me to share a little bit about our programs in the Department of Public Health. And I'm thrilled to be attending this meeting today to learn more from the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robin. Certainly appreciate and feel better. That's terrific. All right. Give me a second here. Now we are going to move into our panel. First, we're going to do the video. Then we're going to have the live panel. So give me a second here. Put this back to share screen. This one. Click, click. Okay. All right. And as we're going through the videos and the show, please feel free out there to drop your questions into the Q&A box, and we'll have plenty of time to put that all in. No need to raise your hand, just throw them in the Q&A. I can guarantee you that we will get to them. The first question we had was, why is it not too early for holiday music? It's never not too early. All right. So our first panelist, and he will be joining us live in about an hour via video link, is Professor I. Nelson Rose, Professor Emeritus of Law and Attorney, Whittier College. He writes an amazing blog called gamblingandthelaw.com. Professor Rose has been doing this work for nearly 40 years, and he's been a great inspiration and taught me a lot through the years. We recorded a brief segment about a week ago on me asking him some thoughts. So I'm going to go ahead and play that. And again, drop your questions into the Q&A box. And here we go. Welcome, Nelson. It's great to see you again. It's been many years since we've seen in person. You've been an amazing mentor and friend to our program at UCLA for many, many years. I've learned so much about gambling from you. You're recording this from your home office in Utah, and yes. Welcome again to our very first sports betting forum, where we're talking about the impact of gambling on California, not only now, but potentially down the road. So with that, can you give us a few of some of your expert thoughts and opinions about the sports betting propositions that are on the ballot right now, and what the consequences may be for our state of California moving forward?
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Tim, and thank you for inviting me. It's really been difficult to keep up with what's going on with gambling, being in one of the only 2 states that doesn't have legal gambling in the United States. So I think to put it in perspective, we are in what I call the 3rd wave of legal gambling. 3rd time in American history that gambling has spread everywhere. And twice before it's been outlawed, but it's very specific forms. So during Gold Rush, California, there were casinos in San Francisco, but lotteries were the problem. So they wrote into the 1849 Constitution a prohibition on lotteries. Then the wave crashed, prohibition came in, the 3rd wave started again. Racetracks were reopened, but it wasn't, the lottery was rediscovered in 1963. And what has happened is there is so much legal gambling now in the United States that legalizing one more form is usually not a problem, except that there is so much legal gambling in the United States that local operators now have the power to, in effect, they have political vetoes. So the racetracks had a monopoly for a half a century, and finally they lost to the state lottery coming in through an initiative written by a manufacturer of lottery ticket scratchers, right? So we keep seeing this pattern where now of course, the tracks are involved, but they're less powerful. The licensed card clubs are involved, but they're not very powerful. But we have more than 107 federally recognized Indian tribes, at least 30 or 40 large casinos making a lot of money, which the tribes have used very wisely in building their political power. And the last big prize is sports betting. In fact, the last big prize in the United States is California sports betting, since California has a population greater than Canada. So you've got every political player that could be involved is involved in this. The amounts of money being spent on these initiatives, unprecedented. The tribes, of course, want to keep their monopoly. So they want to have sports betting where you have to go to the tribal casino to make the bet. And by the way, as long as they're getting sports betting, they put in, well, we also want roulette and craps, which they don't have at the moment. Meanwhile, these gigantic internet sports betting operations, the books, wrote their initiative, and they wrote it in such a way that they would be the only ones really to make money. I mean, it's got a provision that says you can't get a license in California unless you've been licensed in 10 other states, so that's to lock out everybody else. So I think as a coincidence, partly because of the politics of the time, we have these two gigantic political campaigns, and they're knocking each other out. People just say, a pox on both your houses. But once it's defeated at the polls, it's not going away. They'll try to get sports betting through the legislature. There will be other initiatives next year. Hundreds of millions of dollars are going to be spent because this is the big multi-billion-dollar prize. Absolutely. Is sports betting in California.
So let's say it eventually does get through, whether it's brick and mortar or mobile sports betting.
Right.
What does California then look like in your mind from a legal and gambling standpoint? What happens to our state?
Well, first of all, we are close to being the largest gambling market in the world anyway, because the state is so big. Once you have sports betting, I think by most standards, California will be the largest gambling market in the United States and one of the largest in the world. And it does make a difference which way it goes. If it's only brick and mortar, it'll be hundreds of millions, billion-dollar market. But if it's internet, because the state is so big, and some of the tribes, for example, are so remote that you will have, it'll be multi-billion-dollar market. And that, the question is, okay, will we then have internet casinos and internet poker? Probably not, because when the state lottery came in, and remember that was an initiative written by a manufacturer of scratchers, they got into the Constitution that there would be no casinos because they didn't want the competition. They didn't think about the tribes because this was too early in the cycle of legalization. So that will be a big fight to amend the state constitution to bring in internet casinos.
Right.
I don't see that, but I sure see, even if we start with brick and mortar casinos, we will have, brick and mortar sports betting, we will have remote wagering on sports.
So if you were advising the governor, what would you say to him or her about how to proceed with sports betting in a thoughtful and safe and legal fashion?
Well, number one, because you have these major political players, you have to get a consensus. You have to get the racetracks, the card clubs, the Indian casinos, and the big outside operators who want to bring in a lot of money into the state. And you got to get them to agree. That's almost impossible. They've been working for almost 10 years on internet poker and can't agree. So they have to try to at least get minimum agreement and minimum standards, like the age should be 21, not 18. The tribes have to be involved, both because of their political power and legally. If a form of gambling is legalized in the state, the tribes can do it anyway. So the tribes have to be involved. The tracks have to be involved because they've got so many employees and they're losing, they're being wiped out. The card clubs have to be involved because they are such a major source of funding for many small cities and even some large ones like San Jose. And if the card clubs are wiped out, which Prop 26 would do, social services for the poor in many parts of California would be really hard hit. But you need to get in, of course, they're going to talk mainly about taxes,
Right.
if you're the governor, but they have to put in the protections for basically problem gamblers, right? And the security systems, those are pretty good already because there's so much in the rest of the United States. But
and one of the things I've been wondering, what I rarely hear about, what are the downsides of not legalizing sports betting? You know, what could happen to the negative in California if we don't bring sports betting in?
Well, of course, like every other state that has prohibition and there's liquor stores in all the towns surrounding that state, we see this outflow of money for people who want to bet legally. And of course, this helps. Nevada lives off of California, Arizona, and any other place that you'd rather go to Nevada to gamble than locally. Well, if there's no sports betting, people will go to Nevada. The illegal sports betting, it does look like if you legalize a form of gambling, it does hurt the illegal operators. But if you don't legalize it, and it's so big now that you're going to have a lot more illegal sports betting in California if California doesn't legalize sports betting.
Do you have any idea the size of the unregulated market, the gambling market in California or in America?
It's hard to tell. The only reported numbers that we have a history on is the sports books in Nevada. And first, you got a definition problem. If two people make a friendly sports bet in California, it's probably not illegal, right? So illegal gambling has to be defined, but a lot of the estimates are way larger than what the numbers have shown. In other words, the illegal sports betting market, where let's talk about bookies, not just friendly bets, is it's not in the hundreds of billions of dollars. You know, it is in the billions of dollars, but it's not quite as big as people think. Partly again because you got the definition problem,
Right?
And also illegal bookies, are not retail, except for on college campuses.
Right.
Illegal bookies like to have a few large bettors so they don't accidentally have a cup. But on college campuses, there are guys who are taking bets from everybody, that's big in retail.
That's absolutely. Yeah. So, all right, we're gonna finish up with one more question, and then we're
Sure.
gonna have you live.
Very
in
good.
an hour for our audience Q&A. But leave me with any piece of information or nugget or opinion about sports betting that they think people might find surprising that they may not know already.
I think probably the most surprising thing is it's not as profitable as people think. In fact, it's often not profitable at all. First of all, the standard bet is $11 to get 10 or 1,100 to get 1,000, right? So your margin for the bookie, they take in $22 and they pay out 21. So they keep 1 out of 22. And for betting, legal betting, that's not very big. And of course, you don't have the rapid turnover like with slot machines. And in Nevada, when they've had Super Bowls where the sports books have actually lost money, on top of the fact that the margin is so small, there are taxes. There's a federal excise tax on the bet. It's like a sales bet that the sports book has to absorb. And then, of course, the state will put a very big tax on it. So I'm actually surprised that there is so much interest by big operators in getting sports gambling because they don't make money on it.
Right.
But they figure it's a way, particularly with the internet, to get into the more profitable forms of gambling.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of the evolution, you know, with the in-game parlays and the rapid betting. I think that those margins are definitely different than the traditional sports betting. Thank you, Professor Rose. This is great to have you recorded on video. It'll be even better when we log on in about a half hour with you in person. So you can wear the same shirt or you can wear some like stump us.
Well, thank you. And thank you. I hope you guys are enjoying a nice, warm California. We had snow in October.
Not bad. Work. Okay. Second up, we have actually in person all the way from the East Coast, from Virginia. The first colony is Brianne Dora Schwal. Oh my gosh, I butchered that. Of Dora Schwal Consulting, DSC. Brianne's been involved in gaming policy, gaming advocacy, responsible gambling, gambling law, lobby work for now nearly a decade. And I think it's absolutely terrific to have her out here because she can advise anyone, lawmakers, legislators, clinicians, policymakers, media people about what's actually going on in the world. So she's going to give us an overview of kind of what's happened in other states once they've legalized and regulated sports betting. She's going to give us an insider view on some of the really hot button topics that are actually happening on the streets and in the states. So, you know, we oftentimes get insulated here in California, you know, the weather, and we forget that there's a big country out there, just like they forget about us sometimes. So it's great to have her come out here and tell us about what's happening in the other states. So let me load up your slides. And again, audience online, please feel free to throw in your questions into the chat. Keep them coming, and we're going to have a great session of it. Okay, I'm going to stop this. I'm going to minimize Robin. I don't mean to minimize Robin. We would never minimize Robin. And we will bring this up. So this goes here. This goes there. Wait, we're not sharing though. Are we sharing? Give me a second here. Did I log off? No. Help me out here. Share screen. Here comes the slides. Here comes the maximal view. And I'm going to minimize this. It's just this point, I tell everyone in junior high, I was on the AV club. But the AV club back then comprised of slide projectors, microfilm, and putting the film up and not getting unstuck. So those are skills highly relevant today. All right, Brianne, you're here. You got to stand right here. You got to look at the camera.
Yes.
You got an audience. You have your slide. You can advance either way. And away we go.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me here today. I was not part of the AD Club, nor am I. I'm going to just stand here, smile. I mean, sorry.
No.
So Dr. Rose was talking about the
There
nice
you go.
weather. I was hoping for nice weather
Okay.
too. It's a little cold here, you guys, but I'm still thrilled to be here. As Dr. Fong said, my name is Brianne Dora-Schwal, and I have been in the problem gambling space for about 10 years now, where I began my work in Massachusetts at the Massachusetts Council on Compulsive Gambling. Then I moved over to the National Council on Problem Gambling. Then I took my work to an international level because I thought as the US undergoes its single largest expansion of gambling in our nation's history, who better to learn from than other jurisdictions that have already been there and really examine the implications of harm and problem gambling through this new form of legalized gambling expansion. So I'm very privileged to be here with you today and talking a little about what we've seen happen throughout the US since 2018. I have had the privilege in working in all but 2 of the states that have chosen to legalize, whether that be through my work with the legislative bodies, the regulatory agencies, potentially the departments of public health. Am I not speaking loud enough? Oh, my kids would doubt that. Are you kidding? Mommy's not speaking loud enough. And so let's talk a little about what we've been seeing. So I think to get a real true appreciation for sports wagering, problem gambling, the harm that comes, we have to start kind of at the beginning, right? American culture and sports. So I consider it or liken it to be like a religion for us, right? And it's also a significant business. In fact, according to a Reuters report, the market for professional sports in the US is roughly 69 billion. I've seen upwards of 73 billion, but nonetheless, we're talking about a market that's roughly 50% larger than that of all Europe, the Middle East, and Africa combined. This is a big business. And a lot of these estimates and reports were done prior to the inclusion of sports betting. So its value add is only going up. And look at this, a projection of 83.1 billion by next year. And it's not just professional sports, right? It's college sports. And actually, when we look at initiatives to legalize sports betting within jurisdictions, college wagering has been almost that Achilles heel. Massachusetts went back and forth. Do we? Don't we? Will it mean we have it? Maybe it won't go through. College sports is just as important and relevant as professional sports. So what happens when for many, many decades, we aren't allowed to have sports betting? In 2018, the US Supreme Court overturned this ban. And many had presumed this meant that now all of a sudden we had sports betting everywhere, like that overnight. And that's not the case, right? Now it just meant that every sovereign tribal nation or every state could decide themselves if this is something that they wanted to embark upon. But don't be fooled. Whether it was legal or not, sports betting was happening. And actually, the American Gaming Association argued that it was about $150 billion that was being wagered illegally on sports. So there's a very strong consumer appetite for this, because whether it was legal or not wasn't relevant. It's happening. And I would argue that whether or not each of the propositions, if they pass or if they don't, this is something you have to be concerned about, because people are doing it. People want it, and people are suffering harm as a result of it. So then how are we going to act? Additionally, an interesting survey around sports wagering said that about 72% of avid sports fans believe that this ban should be lifted before PASFA, and that roughly about 28 million people would be inclined to wager. And I'm going to talk to you a little about how wrong they had it and about actually how they vastly underestimate it. You know, it's funny to me when I see this 72% of avid sports fans. And what's been fascinating to watch here in California from afar and about all the projections that these propositions might actually fail is that you'll be the first state where a ballot fails. Overwhelmingly, we have seen states incorporate and legalize sports wagering. People want it, people are doing it. So what happened here? California is going to be a very interesting test case, I believe, for many years to come, no matter what the result is. And Dr. Rose spoke a little to this, so I don't want to belabor the point, but there's a lot of economic gains to come from this. You know, the American Gaming Association will highlight things like economic outputs, jobs that are supported both directly or indirectly. I mean, these numbers are large. Do you remember when I talked about the 28 million people that might be inclined to wager? How about 31 Americans in one game that are betting, that now have access to legalized sports wagering? Or 46.6 million Americans that want to wager during one season of one type of sport, NFL. Now, why did I put Iowa up there? I wanted to highlight just how big of an industry this is, because when I think of the gaming capitals of the US, I think Vegas. I think Atlantic City. I'm sorry, I love Iowa. I've been there a couple of times, but I wasn't thinking Iowa. Look at how much money is being driven by handle and revenue from sports betting in Iowa. It's a big business, a big, big business, and consumers want it. And it's not just the Super Bowl, March Madness. There's a reason that it's Problem Gambling Awareness Month in March, right? The largest betting event, March Madness, and it's hit an all-time high. And we're only going to see that number grow up as access to sports betting also increases. I mean, look at this. The American Gaming Association predicted that more than 17% of adults plan to wager $3.1 billion on a tournament. Big dollars, a lot of people. So here we are, folks. This is the state of the United States. We have 31 states, DC and Puerto Rico, that have live legal sports wagering. We have 5 states that currently have legal but not yet operational sports wagering. And then we have you all in a lovely shade of cream, because we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. But don't be fooled again. People in California, they travel, they're playing this, they have access. And that's not even taking into account how easy it is to access illegal or offshore apps. And look, not 1 or 2 of these states have decided to embark upon sports wagering in the same way. And you will fit into that exact same theme. Some instances we're seeing sports wagering in brick and mortar only presentation. You've got Tennessee and Wyoming, it's only offered online. We see hybrid. Different jurisdictions have defined what is a sports bet very differently. We're seeing jurisdictions accepting wagers on esports, on college, on in-play, prop bets, you name it. Someone's got some variation of it. In fact, actually, although this is defined, or sports wagering, as a form of Class 3 gaming, there are several jurisdictions where the lottery is the regulator for the product. And so 18-year-olds actually have legal access to sports wagering. So here it is, some more data. I love data. It helps me basically wrap my head around where things stand. But I think the most important thing that we could take away from this is that this is a big business that's happened very, very rapidly, and that nearly 52.7 billion has been wagered on sports throughout 2021, and that was double 2020. So what happens come January 1 of next year? Are we going to see those numbers? Are they going to double again? The first 49 months of legalization, revenue topped $10 billion. And that all generated from 141 billion in handle. And as Dr. Fong pointed out, we're seeing certain states like New Jersey and New York have handle numbers of $1 billion consistently every 30 days. And I remember one of the first times that New Jersey didn't hit that $1 billion threshold. It was February. I was like, why did that happen? Well, there was only 28 days in the month, but we almost got there. This is a big, big business. And we're seeing not only just big economic output and revenue dollars, we're also seeing the first of its kind type of deals. This is what I like to say, not your mom's traditional type of gambling. We're not going somewhere always to a casino. It's happening instantly and constantly on phones and throughout the communities. And we're starting to see deals between operators and colleges. Or, there was one day that I was getting ready to tweet about how Spain was going to be pulling back on allowing gambling operators to promote their products on jerseys. And that was the same day that the first ever jersey endorsement happened right in my backyard in DC, where other jurisdictions seem to be pulling back on the market. We seem to be running full steam ahead. How payments happen is also evolving. We're starting to see cashless, right? If all of your gambling is happening on your phone and on the computer, how are you paying? Not with cash, with credit cards, with debit cards, with e-wallets. All things that also can have an implication on harm. So the US is jumping full steam ahead. I know I am calling out names. This is not to pick on anyone. It's just to show you what's happening. There's this new high profile company, Better, that is offering micro betting. And it's basically an app that's going to be geared to predicting and wagering on every pitch, and every game, every play. This is going to be almost like the potential of a slot effect around sports betting. And not only that, I talk a lot about online, I talk about mobile, but look at this. We're talking about sports books being in stadiums. And actually, again, home sweet home for me, some of the very first ones are in my backyard. So now we have to ask ourselves, sporting events, arenas, they're family-based, but now you're taking your kids right on past a sports book or a casino. And what are the implications of that? We're starting to see things that we've never seen before, emails with offers, incentivizing people to get in on the action. And the money, as Dr. Rose highlighted, is just phenomenal when it comes to marketing and advertising. And I don't think there's a market that understands and appreciates that better than all of you, because the amount of money we've seen poured in to trying to get this legalized has been unprecedented. But it's also true within the legalized states as well. I can't go a few commercials without seeing at least 2 or 3 ads in Virginia. They're everywhere. And they'll say things like this, risk-free. Look at this money that's being offered to get people to engage. $1,000, $1,500. This is not walking to a casino and getting $10 of free play. We're talking $1,500, $2,000. I've seen upwards of $3,000. But I'd like to argue there's no such thing as a risk-free bet. Just like there's no such thing as a risk-free sip of alcohol or a risk-free puff of a cigarette. This is a product that can lead to harm for some. Now, here's Prop 26 talking about what it would look like and how the revenue would be distributed, let's say. And here's 27. Now, we could sit here and debate, does one carry more risk than the other? And I'm here to say that sports betting in general, however it's presented, carries risk. and carries risk worth discussing. And that's why I'm so excited to be here today to answer any questions you have, especially when we're confronted with numbers like this. You may have the potential to have the same number of individuals in your state who are struggling from problematic gambling as the entire population of Washington, D.C. And research is very clear that when you introduce any form of new type of gambling, so too will you increase the number of problems. So what are you all going to do about it? You're kind of working from a bit of a deficit. And let's just say that the infrastructure around problem gambling services is lacking pretty consistently across the US. Right now, you ranked 27th in the US as it relates to your per capita investment in problem gambling services. So that begs the question, was there enough attributed here in each of the propositions to be able to combat and address appropriately the harm that will result from legalization? I don't know. But I do know that a comprehensive problem gambling system needs to include research, prevention, treatment, and recovery. And if this were to happen, there is nothing more important to get across to regulators and policymakers that if you're going to address problem gambling as a result of sports wagering, those are the 4 aspects that you need. There is no federal funding for this, so it needs to fall upon the shoulders of the state and from the revenue to be able to combat this. And I'll leave you with this. This question comes from the National Council on Problem Gambling Survey on Gambling Attitudes and Gambling Experiences. It does not ask the question, is it mobile or brick and mortar? This is talking about sports betting in general. And it highlights that individuals who are engaged in sports betting compared to all other forms of gambling are 2 to 3 times more likely to struggle with problematic gambling. So if we're going to bring this product into the state, we have to address the fact that this is a group that is twice as likely to be struggling with problematic gambling. And how are the best ways to address these concerns? I guess I will leave it there. I have other slides, but I want to be cognizant of time, and I'm happy to answer any questions as we continue the discussions.
Slide, you want to finish the slide?
I mean, I have a thank you slide. Or I don't.
Okay. Thank you, Brianne, for a terrific look, and we have lots of questions for you coming up. Our next portion is this. And after I picked up Brianne from the airport yesterday, we made a quick detour to drive by one of our card rooms that are near the airport. Now, we didn't get a chance to go in, but definitely struck by the size of SoFi Stadium and the card room next to it. All right. Next up, we have Robert Jacobson. Robert Jacobson is the executive director of the California Council on Problem Gambling. He too will be logging on in about 25 minutes. And these are prepared statements of a brief interview that he and I conducted last week. I'm wearing the same shirt. It's the same thing. Hey there, Robert. It's great to see you again. Everyone out in the audience, this is Robert Jacobson, the executive director of the California Council of Problem Gambling. He's been in that position since 2011. If you don't know about the California Council of Problem Gambling, take a look at their website, calproblem.org or calpg.org. Robert, you're going to be joining us live in about 45 minutes via Zoom. We're recording this a week before our summit, but I wanted to get you for about 10 minutes or so to give us a little preview about what you're going to be talking about. Give us a few nuggets, if you will, some thoughts and opinions about sports gambling expansion in California. What have you learned over the last few months about that? And in particular, how it will impact our state if it actually passes?
All right. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here virtually a week in advance, and then for having me here in about 45 minutes. I hope everybody's enjoying the summit so far. And I guess we'll jump straight into it then. So the question as to what have we learned in the past few months, I think this would be more applicable to say, what have we learned over the past few years, since of course, sports betting has not been legalized in California yet, and it remains to be seen if it will be. But we now have seen more than 30 different states legalize, whether it be mobile or in person or some combination of the two. To date, everything that I think we've seen really supports what the speculation was prior to a lot of this legislation passing, and which kind of goes back towards when the Wire Act in 2012 was overturned and internet poker began to be legalized, which is essentially that the states that have legalized mobile sports betting tend to obviously see much more money being bet and much more money being won by the operators, but also tend to see a lot greater risk to the residents of those states because of just effectively unlimited access, and also because of the ability to program in-game proposition bets and to offer a wider variety of bets at a higher pace. Whereas the states where people are going into brick and mortars, certainly they can still offer those in-game prop bets, but if they have a customer who's somewhere else in the casino and not able to place the bet in that exact moment, they're not going to be placing as many of those. Mm-hmm. So ultimately, we've seen exactly what we expected, which is that, knowing that studies have shown that sports betting is probably the most addictive type of gambling or bets that you can place. When a state does expand to sports betting, we may see those people who are already suffering from gambling harms suffer from greater harms or suffer from them more quickly. But when they go to mobile betting, we see that it could also have an impact on prevalence.
Yeah, it makes sense. What are your greatest concerns when sports betting goes legal at some point in California?
So for those of you who know CCPG, this you've heard before. For those of you who don't, we are a what we say gambling neutral organization, meaning we have no opinion on legalization or expansion of any form of gambling. So my greatest concerns would be that should it pass, consumer protections are enacted within whatever final legislation is written. Robust self-exclusion program, for example, that would be overseen by governmental regulatory agency. And obviously, of course, that appropriate funding is available to account for whatever additional harms may be occurring in the state. And when I say to account for, I'm of course referring to more treatment and prevention services, better ability for marketing and public education and outreach, and those critical prevention programs that need to occur as well.
Right. What are some of the numbers you've been hearing? I always like to compare numbers, but with expanded mobile sports betting, that would bring in approximately how many new players? Have you heard anything that we can put our hat on?
I haven't, and I don't know if there's any. You hear some numbers in the media, but I don't personally think I would buy into any of those. I've always said that numbers can say whatever you want them to say. You can always find a study and extrapolate it out to make the numbers say what you want them to say. We've heard prevalence rates anywhere from a rubber band of 5 times on the high end to the low end. People can always find whatever number that they want to support their position. And I think it's just really too early to actually know what the impact would be in California.
And I've been asking a lot of people this other question, again, about the unregulated markets. What do you see would happen to the unregulated market, even with expansion of legalized sports betting?
I think the unregulated market in California is smaller. Again, numbers can say whatever you want them to say. I don't think it's as big as people think it is. It certainly exists, and I'm not trying to minimize it. But So there's two factors here. The first factor is most people are not tech savvy. And when you live in a state that prohibits sports operators from operating in the state, it's not as easy to access those sites as you would think. It is possible. And again, I'm not trying to say nobody accesses it or to minimize it, but it's not widespread because it's difficult to access. The second thing is that as it began to become clear, when PASPA was overturned, that sports betting could happen in California, a lot of the offshore betting operators that are trying to break into the states became cognizant of the fact that legislation could block bad actors, and they made greater efforts to block bets from occurring in the states that they were hoping to operate in. So while there's certainly people out there placing illegal sports bets, I think more of them are likely to be placing them through bookies or even through other states in the US right now than they are with some of the offshore bettors. And I think some of the numbers we hear, just as one example, there's been estimates out there of the size of the illegal sports betting market. And you hear these enormous numbers, but what you don't see is how the formulation occurs, which is that it includes things like office pools.
Right.
Somebody puts in $5 on a football square, and then they just extrapolate and they say there's 1 million office pools at $5. Well, that's 5 million at 20 people a pool is 100 million, and you make $100 million appear out of thin air into your pool. And office pools are not going away. Things where people are betting among friends, that does not change. Things where people are accessing illegal offshore betting operators, that certainly goes away if you can access it. I mean, largely goes away if you can access it legally within the state, but I just don't think I don't think the market is that huge as large as the numbers that we hear.
Yeah, and I think that's so spot on. So you mentioned this earlier, but again, I like to get more specific. If you were advising the governor and say, Governor, ma'am or sir, here are 3 things we need to do as a state to make sure that our state stays as healthy as possible in the event we expand sports betting, what would you say to the governor?
Increase problem gambling funding 100-fold. Actually, the reason I say 100-fold is because there's a study out there. The number, it's a survey, not a study. The number is wordy and it's complicated, but what it effectively amounts to is that public funding for substance abuse disorder is about 100 times greater on a per individual basis than it is for problem gamblers. So that's where the 100 came from. But I mean, we know we don't need, at this point, we certainly don't need 100 times the funding, but we need a lot more than we have. We definitely need 2 to 3 times more to start, give us some time to scale up and then see how much more we need from there. So first and foremost is to ensure that the funding exists and that a mechanism exists to continue increasing that funding if the size of the gambling market increases, if costs escalate like inflation is rampant, and whatever we need to do to ensure that funding is there. Second is to incorporate really robust consumer protections. This would start with, but certainly not be limited to, self-exclusion. And ideally have those consumer protections centralized and standardized, which are different things. But essentially, if we have 10 sports betting operators in California, when you self-exclude from one, you need to be self-excluded from all of them. And at the same time, you should probably be self-excluded from all other governmentally regulated forms of gambling. And then since we asked for 3, I would say the third one here was in my head just a moment ago and escaped. But it exists.
It exists somewhere. Those are really, really sharp. I mean, those are things. Couple more things, and then we'll save,
I got number 3. Sorry.
we'll save some more time for the live Q&A. Again, I mean, this is what do we learn? What have you learned from other states so far? And is there any other state that you can point to where expansion of sports betting has really improved the quality of life in that state?
We're gambling neutral. I can't answer that. Because if I answer in one direction or the other, then I'm still violating neutrality. But
right. So we'll stay neutral. We'll reframe it. What about any other states that have put together, in your mind, really, really excellent programs that we should be either doing here in California, or also supporting even more?
When New Jersey expanded, they implemented the vast majority of, if not the entirety of, NCPG's internet consumer protections and sports betting protections, and from a regulatory standpoint. And certainly what we want to see here is the implementation of researched and collaboratively developed best practices. We know that there is not enough research on virtually anything that we're discussing here today. But what research exists needs to be used to fuel our ultimate decisions so that we can make those best efforts towards best practices. And so, yeah, I would follow the New Jersey regulatory model. I'm not saying I would follow everything else New Jersey did, but the adoption of those best practices, that would be a good place to start.
I think that absolutely. And for those in the audience that don't know, again, our California state since 2009 through the Cal Gets program has an annual budget of about $8 million, all in OPG. That figure has remained the same since 2009, even before that. So we don't have to be neutral. We can state the facts. That is facts. And those are comparison to the several hundred million that alcohol, drug, and tobacco programs receive in California to do their work. All right, any last words about just trivia or nuggets or things about sports betting that you think people haven't thought about or might be surprised to learn about?
Okay. I don't have anything that I specifically think people might be surprised to learn about, but I will just consolidate one thing I referenced several times because this was my third previously. We need more research. What we're talking about today is what we believe. It's qualitative analysis. But we're talking about observations from a market that's been evolving at light speed over the course of 2 years and lacked research prior to its evolution. So at the end of the day, what we need is research. And so that would be my number 3, going back to the governor, is, commit to better research, commit to funding that research, and then commit to actually adapting the market as the research shows us where we need to go.
And if you thought it for a second here about those burning research questions that you'd be interested in, I mean, I could come up with 1,000, but as you think about some of those questions, think about, for instance, the last prevalence study that was done in California was 2006, 16 years ago, which, as we all know, 3.7%. Lifetime problem pathological gambling, 1.3% current within the last 12 months. That's 16 years ago. But do you have some burning research questions you'd like us to think about?
I mean, obviously prevalence and the impacts on prevalence, also the impact on overall harms that occur, and maybe some sort of analysis. We talk about a large group of at-risk gamblers. And then we talk about the differences between disordered level 2 and level 3, which for simplicity, we just, but we refer to as problem gambling versus gambling addiction. I would like to know what kind of interplay such a massive, potentially massive expansion of gambling has within those different populations. Does it have a disproportionately high impact to at-risk or problem gamblers? Does it result in us having fewer problem gamblers and more people suffering from a gambling addiction? We also talk about prevalence rate being a lifetime rate. So what impacts does it have on the annual rate, on the people suffering from, or on the people gambling to excess, at this very moment? And what impact does it have on people in recovery? Is it going to result in a higher rate of relapse? So pretty much, it's the same questions I think most everybody here would have, is what is going to be the impact short and long term on those populations that are most vulnerable?
That's really great. So we're going to log off now, and then we're going to come back and get you live via Zoom. If you want to wear the same shirt for continuity, you can certainly do that, or you can put on a fresh shirt in a week from time. So,
I will wear a shirt. I promise you that.
So again, just for the audience who's taking notes, we'll repeat it again: 1-800-GAMBLER. Cal pg.org is the website for California Council on Problem Gambling. Thank you, Robert. Log off now, and we're going to magically have you reappear on the big screen just in a few minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Fong, and I'll see everybody in 3, 2, 1.
All right, so we're gonna keep going. I have a little bit of wrap up, and then we're gonna wait for them to log on. We have tons of questions coming in, and we're probably just gonna keep rolling. That way we can maybe even finish early and try and beat traffic and get lunch, maybe in those order. So let me summarize a little bit of what we were thinking about. You heard a little bit where we have been, where we are, what the issues are happening in America. And over the last few months, these are kind of the things we've been synthesizing and thinking about issues moving forward. Burning question, burning ideas, kind of the roadmap. Number one, what is going to happen to the rate of gambling disorder with any kind of expansion of sports betting? How much for every 100 new people who are introduced to this activity, how many of them will ultimately become gambling disorder? How long will it take? Will it be faster? Will it be slower? These are all the fundamental questions we would look like. If our state prevalence rate just goes up by 1%, from 1.3% up to 2.3%, talking about millions of lives that are impacted. It's a huge, huge area. 20 years ago, when we talked about opioids, no one was mentioning opioid crisis. No one mentioned epidemic. No one foresaw the fentanyl problem as it is right now. So over the next 5 or 10 years, how do we make sure we don't talk about a gambling crisis in 2030 or 2035? Those are the questions we want to focus. I don't have the answers, but that's what we're incumbent on all of us to do a little bit better to work on that. Who is the most vulnerable at risk? Obviously, at first glance, it's going to be people with active substance use disorder, people with past histories of gambling disorder, people with any untreated mental health conditions. But it's also going to be, certain communities of color. It's going to be people from lower socioeconomic groups there as well. But we actually don't know when it comes to sports betting, are those same vulnerabilities true as they are for other forms of gambling? And how much can really prevention, education, responsible gambling practice keep those rates down? And one of the things that we don't know is states that have had robust prevention and treatment in place when you expand gambling, the theory is, of course, that's going to minimize the harm. But the proof is it's hard to measure. And those are the things that we want to look at. How do you manage underage from accessing sports betting? This is 21 and over. This is not an adolescent young person's activity, yet it's being sold that way. 18 and over in some states, right? Brianne, are there 18 and older casinos across America where an 18-year-old can legally bet on sports?
Yes, so not in the brick and mortar casino to my knowledge, but in Washington.
Washington, you can do 18 and over online. So 21 or 18, but let's say for the most part it's 21. Why are we advertising it as if this were a family activity, as no different than watching YouTube or going to the movies, right? So, but the larger question is, when you're going to put it into law, who's going to enforce at 21 and under? Who's going to stop that teenage high school senior from logging onto the phone? So I actually had a very interesting story with this. Was when our 17-year-old son, his phone is exactly the same iCloud account as mine, the same Apple ID account. So his phone is an exact mirror of my phone. I take a photo, it shows up on his. He takes a photo, it shows up on mine. I can't tell you some of the things I'm seeing, but it's there on the phone. That means he can log into any gambling app I have access to. And I did not know that until we were in a state that actually had mobile sports betting. I downloaded the app, I put it open, and then all of a sudden I came back into the hotel room. He's looking at lines and he's about to make a bet. I said, what is happening? And we laugh about it, but it's not funny, right? Because that should have been protected. He should not have been able to do that. But because he was on a phone that mirrored mine, it was as if he were me. Who's going to enforce that? Parents, teachers, coaches. Are we going to get this into the high schools? Are we going to get this into the churches, the synagogues, the coaches? One of the things we didn't talk about here today, we maybe in the Q&A hour, is what is this impact of all this sports betting on the thousands and hundreds of thousands of young men and women who play sports, who now have an entire new set of stress. They know what their number is. They know they're supposed to score 22.5 points that night, and they're at 21, and there's 5 seconds left. Do I make that layup or not? That's a huge psychological impact. We're going to talk a lot more about access to digital currency. This is cashless. How do we stop that link from payday loans, online loans, into the sports betting account? I don't think we're talking about that nearly enough. I have so many patients where the problem isn't just access. The problem is access to money that gets them into the gambling side. Advertising, we talked a lot about that. How do we do better with advertising? Right now, the state of California doesn't really regulate gambling advertising that intensely. We don't really regulate cannabis advertising as well as we could. We have to start looking at, is it proper? Is it safe to have really young people messaging for gambling? What about the online space on advertising? So I really think about all this for the underage population, for the young people, delaying the onset. So instead of your first bet being at age 12, it's gonna be age 21, 22. Minimize the frequency. We know, again, the younger you are and the more frequently you start betting, that's when you develop risk. So how do we slow down the frequency of betting? We have to learn from alcohol and tobacco what's really worked for young people. You know, tobacco is a fascinating story. You know, we worked so hard for 30 plus years to get young people and adolescents smoking rates down to under 8%. And then what happens? Vaping comes around, new technology. Smoking rates of tobacco still remain very low, but vaping rates of nicotine are at an all-time high. So we have to modernize and keep up with innovations. What happens to public health with sports betting expansion? The general questions of not only what are the societal costs, but also the benefits with sports betting. We don't want to be all doomsday. We want to say, listen, if sports betting makes our quality of life in California better, in what way does it make us better? You know, what happens to ourselves as individuals, families, and communities because of sports betting? You see one of the fervors or why so many people love sports betting. It brings people together, right? Last weekend or last couple of weeks, there was what's called the sports equinox, where you had all major professional leagues playing on the same day, and including also combat sports there as well. It was a bevy for sports fans, and I can tell you that's a way of people being brought together. And the other thing we haven't mentioned at all, what forms of sports betting are potentially more risky or more harmful than others? You've heard us mention things like in-game parlays, same-day in-game betting, teasers, point spread betting, money lines, spreads, all these other things. Inherently, we don't know very much right now about which ones are greater, more damaging. I talked to an industry representative the other day, and he was saying to me that in their sports book, about 30 to 40% of their handle on any football weekend is mainly in-game parlays. I was like, what? What are you talking about? He's like, we're shocked too. And for those in the audience that don't know what an in-game parlay is, let's say tomorrow UCLA is playing Arizona State, and I'll take 5 bets inside that one game. UCLA to score over 30 points, Arizona State to score less than 20, more than 3 fumbles, total score is going to be above 75, and UCLA to have 8 sacks. Those are 5 separate events I picked in game. So I'm placing $20 on all those 5 things to happen. That's a very different gambling experience than putting $20 on UCLA to win. So different odds, different experience, different psychological impact. You Google help for sports betting right now, this is what you get. You get ads for the proposition. You get ads for, this is a very interesting, top 10 best sports betting in Los Angeles on Yelp. I didn't know we had sports betting in Los Angeles, let alone Yelp to review these sites. But you go on to that, and this is a perfect example of enforcement. Yelp is giving casino reviews on unregulated sports books in California. We don't see 1-800-GAMBLER, we don't see CalGet. So that's that term, because when you think help for sports betting, consumers are like, help for getting my bets down on sports betting. They don't think of help because I had problems in life caused by sports betting. So here's my to-do list that I've kind of created. And I want us to continue to add more to this, of course. Number one, as a field, we have to do much more to focus on those sources of money. Many of these online casinos don't give $5,000 in hard cash that you then have to pay back, like a marker. But it's probably coming, right? We know it's just around the corner. We really have to focus on these online loan and predatory lenders. Brianna was telling me about a sportsbook operator that is also a payday loan lender at the same time. You talk about not only conflict of interest, but really, really gray area kind of stuff. Teasers and promos. We know about credit cards being literally right there on the tables and online there as well. And the crossover from financial technology, which no one ever talks about, but because of the gamification of all those apps, and we know about those, they're not regulated by California Gaming Commission. They're not regulated by SEC. They're not even discussed in Proposition 26 or 27. We know that when you expand sports betting, you're also going to expand financial technology, expand gamification of money. Many of us were just driving into UCLA. You see the big bus, right, talking about a new crypto form. You can't even pronounce it. But that's the sort of thing we expect more and more to happen. We have to do more focusing on sources of money. Looking at our responsible gambling message and really having science-based messaging that really works. The things I don't see enough in that messaging saying very clearly, gambling is not a way to make money sustainably over a long period of time. I don't see that. I see, yes, it should be fun, know your limits, stop when you can. But again, how many of our patients had said, if I could have stopped when I could, I wouldn't have this condition. So I think we have to be more honest and recognize that people still really believe, no, this is a way for me to make sustainable money. I had a patient, that same patient, Greg, and he was interesting. I said to him, what was the difference between when you get paid monthly, your paycheck, 15 grand, versus when you won that $2,500 on that account? He said to me, when my paycheck comes in, I don't feel anything, zero. When that $2,500 landed in my account, I felt high, euphoric. I said to him, but why? He said, Doc, I don't know. That's the power of addiction. That's the power of money won is oftentimes considered sweeter than money earned. Benjamin Franklin said that. Think about that all the time. You know, when you talk to gamblers, like, why are you sweating a $100 bet? And yet when your paycheck comes in for $1,500, you're upset and you're angry. How to manage FOMO, fear of missing out. I don't think we see that enough for the young people, you know, because part of the problem is there's always more bets to be had. So how do we make sure that people know that you can't bet on everything all the time? And again, this basic thing, you don't have any special skills. There's still this very firm belief in sports bettors, right? That I am very good. I'm very good at the over-unders, or I'm very good at picking road teams who are underdogs. This isn't a skill, it's still chance. I always love it every year where they'll put up, this particular year, there's a baby on social media. Has anyone seen this? It's a girl that picks college football teams, and they have the helmets of the team. And then she'll crawl out and she'll just tap the helmet of the team she likes. And her outcomes are as good as any of the other so-called experts. So somehow, but people think of her as an expert, that somehow she's been blessed with magical power. So we forget that as much as we all want to predict the future and have a special power, superpower like that, we don't. Third, we're talking about informing our legislators and regulators about what we're seeing in the clinic, what we're seeing in our offices and at residential programs. We can't stay silent. We have to get those voices out there. I think that's super critical. I do a lot of media work. I encourage everyone online and in person to do more work with the media. The media is really our source to get this information out. I ended up on a piece on NPR last night, and I can't tell you how many people from high school and college are like, hey, I heard you, hey, I heard you, hey, I heard you. And thinking about how much impact just one short interview like that can have, I think is really important. So we have to get those messages out. And again, talking about other ways to reach those sports bettors at early stages. There was a conference, I forget where it was, where someone put up on the line, sports bettors don't view themselves as gamblers. And that was met with a lot of controversy. And when you talk to a lot of folks, they're like, no, I don't view myself as gambling because what I do is based on skill, or I'm investing. But it was even very interesting that that was a statement by someone in the industry. And again, I think it was an example of trying to market them and say, you are different than gambling. You are not a slot machine player. You are not a blackjack player. You are a sports bettor. You're a different breed. And I think we have to be very careful in that sort of language. Okay, so it's just about 11. For those of you, as a reminder, if you're new and it's the first time you're hearing about our state of California having no-cost treatment, This is the brand new 2022 landing page for our state treatment program, freefromproblemgambling.com. You go on there, you can get access to our therapists, to all our services in California, freefromproblemgambling.com. That's our group, our UCLA Gambling Studies Program group, and all the partners that we work with in the state. It's a tremendous wide variety of folks, so we're very, very excited with that. I have to lead with this, and then we open up to the Q&A. What is this? So this is a actual ad from a gambling operator in America that does mobile sports betting. And I pulled it up and I blocked out their name. And I immediately, my first instinct was just a wide range of emotions, from, are you kidding me? To laughing, to anger, to frustration, to how dirty is that phone? To what are we doing here? And I thought for a while on this. Growing up for me, my dad would retreat to the bathroom. We all had this, right? Dad would retreat to the bathroom for 20 minutes, sometimes 30 minutes. What's he doing in there? This is now what Dad's doing in 2022. But this, again, is not a joke. This is their legitimate advertising app. Now, it generates a lot of emotion, but it highlights where we are in 2022. Man or woman gambling on the toilet while they're doing business. What kind of business are they doing is debatable. So has anyone else seen this? Yeah, so that's there. So we can discuss that and move forward. Okay, so it's 11:06. Do we have our other panelists here? Let me go ahead and get Robert and Professor Rose on here. Give me a second here. Take this off. Get show video panel. Are they here? Professor Rose, there you are. Can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Excellent.
Great.
Robert Jacobson, I see you're logged on. Can you see and hear us?
Yes, I can.
Oh my God, it actually works, huh? Don't clap just yet. Don't clap just yet. What do we want? We're going to stop share here, and then we're going to do speaker here, and away we go. So, do we need a break? I think we're good. Let's just keep going. We have a ton of great Q&A. Brianne, get on up here. We're going to start firing off these Q&As. Robert, great to see you. Nelson's great to see you. The video is played flawlessly.
Great.
Robert, it doesn't look like you are wearing the same shirt. Nelson is wearing a different shirt.
No, I'm wearing the same shirt.
You're wearing the same
I
shirt.
was given instructions. I don't know.
I will handle the Q&A, Brianne. You get the spotlight. We're going to turn up the volume here. And thank you, audience, for sticking with us. Let me go all the way to the very top, and we'll start rolling through some of these great questions. And don't be afraid to keep throwing those questions in. Number one, is online offshore sports gambling an issue in California? Are any US-wide statistics available for offshore online sports gambling? And this person is in Wisconsin.
You're all going to look at me. So there is no national study looking at what offshore participation is, right? I mean, these are operators that are intentionally running under, again, my kids would find this so shocking that mommy needs a microphone to talk. They're purposely running under the radar, right? There are some wonderful entities out there that specialize in geolocation that are able to provide like heat maps where it's able to track what kind of participation or intentions are within a market to try and access offshore. But I have no knowledge of one comprehensive study that really highlights how much illegal wagering is happening, with the exception of that first number I started with from the American Gaming Association that estimated around 150 billion annually prior to PASFA.
Nelson, do you have anything to add to that about offshore gambling?
Yeah, what I wanted to start with was actually to spell out the law. What the U.S. Supreme Court decision in PASPA did is it overturned the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, and actually was much bigger. It basically said the federal government cannot tell the states what to do, particularly with crimes. But the federal government still can make individual activity a crime. So the Wire Act still exists. What PASPA said, that ruling said states can do whatever they want intrastate. The Wire Act still makes it a crime for a gambling operator to take a bet across a state line or an international border. So any international gambling, the operator's committing a federal felony. I do expect eventually Congress to get rid of the Wire Act, because there's no reason why Utah should say Nevada and New Jersey can't pool their players for sports bets. When the Wire Act is overturned, it will allow cross-border betting between states and even internationally.
Interesting. Robert, anything else to add to that on offshore betting?
No, I think Brian and Nelson did a great job of addressing it. I think if you're talking about illegal activity, it's awfully difficult to know specifically how much of it is occurring.
Yeah. I've seen a number of these unregulated offshore websites, and it's such a funny puzzle because they operate very smoothly. The bets, the software works great. Your money goes in, your money comes back. And it's just hard to know. There's so much lack of transparency of what's actually happening. Next question we have is really for all of us, talking about specifically about the impact on, again, sports betting, particularly on children. And we're talking about as young as 10. Concerns about our young generation already are online essentially all day. And they're already playfully pretending, betting and checking out their predictions as young as age 10. And we're seeing that through a number of apps, through, again, some of the culture. And I even think in some of the schools where they kind of will have, fantasy leagues in schools, or they'll even do March Madness pools officially as part of school curriculum and things like that. What is our plan? And again, maybe we'll start off with Robert, again, from the advocacy world. Do you think you have an idea or some things we can throw out, particularly for very young humans under the age of 12?
So I'm going to steal part of what would have been Brianne's answer, I'm pretty sure. There was there was a few years ago, there was an issue there was an occurrence with the NFL running fantasy sports for youth, where if you won your fantasy sports league, you would get college scholarships or money towards college. We know that National also has done a lot of work around athlete gambling, which I know is not under 10, but I think this is still relevant. The more gambling is expanded throughout our society, the more normalized it becomes, the more our kids are going to be exposed to it. And obviously there are, just like there have been with drugs and alcohol and tobacco, absolutely necessary measures we have to take that would restrict marketing, that would restrict participation. And much of this needs to occur at the legislative and regulatory levels. But beyond that, even when marketing and participation is restricted, you're still going to see it's already seeping through to all elements of our lives online, if nowhere else. ESPN runs articles about sports betting lines. You no longer go on to ESPN to read about the games. You go on to ESPN to read who's favored in the upcoming game. And I think we need to not run away from it. We need to educate our youth, just like we would about any other potentially harmful activity or substance, about the risks that occur when you participate in gambling. And then, of course, I think all of us know there are studies that show if you start gambling young, you're about twice as likely to develop problems later in life. And these are things that we can't run away from. As gambling continues to become part of the social and cultural norm, and sports betting will probably be the next great barrier that makes it part of those norms. I heard Nelson talk earlier about the third wave of gambling. Something I talk about a lot is that all of us grew up watching commercials of this is your brain on drugs. None of us has ever seen a commercial of this is your brain on gambling. And the reason for that, particularly here in California, the first resort opened in California in 2003 after most of those public awareness campaigns were over. It's only 20 years that gambling has become part of our culture. And it's something that we have to address and educate. And so when we talk about our youth, it's something that needs to be part of their educational process going forward.
Thank you, Robert.
Yes.
And that's really where a lot of, before Nelson jumps in, one of the things that we're looking at again are what are those evidence-based prevention techniques that really truly work. We're fortunate here in California, we have our Betting on Our Future project through the Friday Night Live folks up in Tulare County. They actually have their Spotlight Festival this weekend, and they do a lot of the prevention work. And the prevention work they do is that they get the young people to create ads about gambling. They get the young people to learn about it, participate, empower themselves, and learn those life skills. So I think that's really, really important. Nelson, do you have something to add there?
First, I think Robert is absolutely correct about it becoming a norm. In one of my talks 20 years ago, I used to show a cover of a Forbes magazine of becoming a millionaire outside of corporate America. Two of them, one of what were gambling. One was the chairman of a tribe, and the other was a professional poker player. And nowhere did it say that this is unusual. I think, well, I do have an important comment, which goes to Tim's, what is the most dangerous form, which I think is related to the children. I write a blog called Gambling and the Law. And this one that I'm writing now is going to be how to turn sports betting into a slot machine. And I finally figured out why people are spending so much money to get it legalized when it doesn't make any money. A regular sports bet, the bet 11 to get 10, gives the sports book 4.5%. But there's a federal tax on the bet. And the states, like New York, is taking 51%. I mean, sports betting doesn't make money. It's slow, except they've discovered the in-game parlay, which Tim mentioned. New Jersey, for example, made 61% of its money from parlays. The win rate isn't 4.5% on parlays, it's 16%. And what we are getting to is not just the in-game parlay, it's what Better is saying. You're going to be able to bet on the next pitch in baseball, the whether the quarterback will run left, right, or pass. I mean, literally, it's going to be the next play, which makes it more and more like a slot machine.
That's really interesting. All right, Brianne, here's a question from the audience. If the online gambling passes, are there explicit protections where players can pull their winnings out, or will there be a limited amount where they can't get it? So what have you heard about that from other states for people who win and they want their money, or do they have trouble getting it, or what sort of stories have you heard?
So this actually was a big concern within a particular jurisdiction where individuals were asking to withdraw funds from their accounts and were being incentivized to keep their money in their accounts. They'd be offered some potential free to play to keep on engaging with the platform. The truth of the matter is the regulator spoke out and said, not here, not now, unacceptable. I think this is where regulators are so vital in looking at what the framework looks like, how it takes shape, and what the expectations are. Operators by and large that I have had the pleasure of working with are ensuring that customers are able to access their money. Now, I like to say the market's only as strong as the weakest actor. This is not to say that there won't be issues, but this is something that absolutely is paramount for the regulatory body to talk about and to put guardrails around.
Have you heard of self-exclusion in mobile sports betting operating?
Yes, of course. So when I look at the 38 jurisdictions, there's obviously a very fractured approach here. No two have done it the same. Obviously, we're talking to policymakers to get a streamlined self-exclusion program up and running, customer based in its approach. Colorado just recently last week passed its first ever statewide self-exclusion program that all operators will now be required to comply with beginning January 1. Some states, it's a operation by operation type of presentation. Some entities offer timeouts, they'll call them, for maybe a week, a month, 6 months. But by and large, timeouts, cool off, self-exclusions are a part of sports betting operations. Is there room for improvement? Absolutely. Is there a lack of consistency? Yes. Is this a huge concern for the consumer? Yes.
Robert, here's an interesting question. You're our tech guy. You're our young person. Well, Brian, young as well, of course. What about metaverse casinos, digital assets, cryptocurrency, and NFTs? We know those are separate, but also video games. And I have not heard of this one, like Zed Run and Durasi NFT Metaverse. Robert, any comments on that? And particularly that space, I think that merging between virtual reality, esports, and all that in between. Well, what are some of your thoughts about that?
Well, this is a topic I've been talking about for a very long time. It's a topic of, I think, very overlooked and major concern is social gaming. And I think a lot of people in this room, this is maybe the most important thing I could give when it comes to social gaming. The definition of gambling, it's prize, chance, and consideration. It's you bet something of value for the chance to gain something of value when the outcome is uncertain. A lot of people will think, how can you possibly spend money on virtual items? And my response to them is, how can you possibly spend money on a better glass of wine or a better steak? Because that's gone tomorrow as well. At the end of the day, you're spending money on something that has value to you because you enjoy it, and that is something of value. When you acknowledge that virtual items still have intrinsic value, you understand that social gaming really does meet that criteria of gambling, but it's completely and utterly unregulated. And when we talk about any form of social gaming in the App Store, Android Store, Apple Store, whatever, all of these, let's just use slot machines. I know the examples that were given were cryptocurrency and games coming out in the NFT space, which the NFT space may or may not take off. But on a wide scale right now, we have social casinos where you would go in and you would purchase coins for the ability to continue playing that are generating, I believe social gaming now is the third largest entertainment industry in the country behind only cable TV and gambling. And it's growing faster than either of the two in front. So then tying that back to the original question, when you talk about, I'm not familiar with those particular games, but I am familiar with the desire of app developers to grow games in the NFT space, which is supposed to just basically add more value to virtual items because they're unique. And obviously other games, I think we have to be very aware that these are forms of gambling, but these are unregulated forms of gambling. And while sports betting legislation and ballots are not going to address these issues, they are issues that very much need to be addressed. They need to be regulated. We need funding. Again, we need funding, we need research, and then we need programs to address them.
That's very helpful. Nelson, anything from the legal perspective there? We're talking about gambling inside video games. We're talking about NFTs, cryptos, things that didn't have any meaning 10 years ago because these were words that didn't exist.
Yes.
Give us some legal nuggets.
Okay. First, I got to say, with Brianne's comment about getting the money out of your account, at least if it's legal, you can get the money out. If you're working with somebody from overseas who's committing a federal felony to begin with, sometimes some of those operators don't give you your money back, and there literally is nothing you can do about it. The social gaming is really an important topic. I mean, Robert is right. It is unregulated. I've done a lot of writing, and on my website, gamblingandthelaw.com, you can search for it. It's important to realize what really hardcore players are spending. They did a study in Europe and found out that people were spending about $550 a month playing games that you can't win anything at, other than the satisfaction of getting to the next level. Turns out the average internet poker player is spending about $550 a month. People are playing not to win money, but just to win, to gamble and win. And they, as long as you don't have the three elements, as long as people are not required to spend any money, or there's no prize of value, or it's based on skill, not chance, it is not gambling. And with Candy Crush, for example, they're making close to $1 billion a year from a game that you literally can't win anything at. The one thing I will tell people that they don't realize is social gambling, being unregulated, has something called dynamic balancing, which means if you are winning too easily, the game gets harder. If it's too difficult, if you're really stuck at a level and you're not willing to spend 99 cents or do whatever it is to get to the next, or wait 24 hours, the game gets easier. They are designed to be addictive. The industry actually brags about it because they don't consider it gambling. The most addictive game since Candy Crush. And Europe is beginning to look at this. There are some countries that are beginning to say, maybe we should just say, this isn't really gambling, but it's something else that we do need, something addictive that we do need to regulate, particularly because it attracts children.
Interesting. All right, turning to Brianne, we got to, this is fascinating. We actually got fresh data coming into the chat, so I want to share that with everyone. So Roxanne from Washington talks about in 2021, they did an adult problem gambling prevalence study with 9,000 Washingtonians. Is that the correct word, Washingtonians? Finding that 1.5% prevalence rate for adults, 3.5% gambling disorder for those who gamble, online gambling, 11.5% of all gambling. Online gamblers were 3 times at risk for gambling disorder compared to in-person gambling. And she very much highlights, well, if we don't legalize it, what are we going to do? Because the question to you, Brianne, how can states pay for increased need for prevention, education, and treatment? The only funding, and this is true for almost every state in America, comes from gambling revenue. But what is the future like? How do we sustain this field? How do we pay for that increased need for treatment?
Yeah, so I think this is twofold. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. This is twofold, right? So it begins for me at the policy level. Anybody who stands to profit from whatever form of legalized gambling, in this case, sports wagering, bears the responsibility and burden to pay to mitigate the risk and reduce the harms that come from it. So this is why I often advise policymakers to create a specific fund, if it's not already in existence, for those 4 things I talked about during my presentation: research, prevention, treatment, and recovery services from problematic gambling. And I think that in certain instances, Washington potentially being one where it's tribal gaming, this is a bit of a different scenario, right? Sometimes this would require a compact having a line item that says money goes directly to problem gambling. This is where it's so important that we are constantly engaging and educating and forming relationships to help everyone who's in this ecosystem better understand and appreciate what does come responsibility-wise from legalized gambling. It is imperative that research become a part of these discussions to really help stakeholders better understand where their needs are at, right? I will often go in and they'll say, well, Brian, what's the magic number? How much money do you need? Is it $1 million? Is it $5 million? Is it a percentage? And I would say that your market's going to constantly evolve. And where you begin, right? I said here, California, you're starting at a deficit. You're 27. You're not exactly coming with a strong existing infrastructure. Maybe your needs and the funding needs to be more targeted to prevention right now, or boy, you could use a prevalence study, right? So you have a better understanding of where you're at. But that might change. Maybe in a year, once you're up and running, you're going to need more treatment dollars. And the best way to understand how money should be allocated is through information, power of research, the power of data. That's why I came up here and bored you with so many stats, because really data and metrics are power to go and implement effective policies. So,
and we've been doing this now for what, 30 years to try to increase funding, sustainable funding for gambling studies and gambling research. When we think about tobacco, alcohol, and cannabis and opioids, they're oftentimes underfunded there as well. Tobacco, in California, why we have so much is because of massive lawsuits, right? Deals that were made by companies that were mandated to pay back.
Yeah.
Alcohol, we've had taxes, that have been very high for hundreds of years. I'm not saying hundreds of years, but a very, very, very long time. Alcohol, tobacco, also alcohol comes from general funds. Substance use disorder comes from federal block grants. SAMHSA, NIDA, NIAAA, federal grants that fund specifically. So I think part of that whole question is that it shouldn't always be on the back of gambling industry. I think that's just short-sighted. It has to be a shared responsibility. Federal response, state response, county response, and even things like private and public health insurance. We now, through our own experience, we know that private and public health insurance will pay for reimbursing our providers to do the work. Well, that's good, but the providers still need training and they still need some basic understanding. So that very interesting question of how to get more out for treatment. It isn't just treatment, it's got to be prevention, education, community engagement, and research. Those are the things that we're looking at. Here's another really great question. Throw out to Robert. I want to ask you about this. Where did it go? The issue about suicide. And unfortunately, all of us have seen this, and we've seen of all the mental health conditions out there, the gambling disorder is unfortunately accompanied with high rates of suicide attempts and suicide completions. We know council has been working on this. We've been working on this. Robert, any messages there about ads that are moving forward or initiatives to try and get that kind of word out that the council will be doing about emphasizing that unfortunately suicides can occur?
So just to be clear, the question is, will we be marketing around the risks of those suffering from gambling disorder being more likely to commit suicide?
Yeah, I think that's the whole thing, just really highlighting again, how does the California Council help the gambler that's in such distress that suicidality emerges? What are those options in California right now?
Okay, so the help services in California all start with the helpline, the 1-800-GAMBLER helpline. And when you call into the helpline, you'll speak with a master's level counselor. The first thing they actually do is crisis assessment and crisis intervention. If the gambler is appearing to be at immediate risk of harming themselves or someone else, then the counselor would probably contact a local crisis center or local authorities. If the gambler is having thoughts of suicide, then the counselor would work with them. Obviously, we have two different treatment programs available in California. So there's the Call to Change program, which is actually run under the UCLA program, that is telephone counseling. Well, they're both run under the Calculus program. So we have telephone counseling and we have one-on-one treatment. And in those instances where the gambler is having thoughts of suicide, then the helpline counselor would, of course, provide access to those programs, provide a referral, and make a connection to the therapist or to the counselor as is appropriate for the gambler. In terms of marketing, to be honest, I generally prefer positive-based marketing. I prefer to focus on recovery. It doesn't mean you ignore the harms that are occurring, but I think the entire message needs to be clear. You need to address the harms that are occurring. You need to acknowledge that it is a problem that affects over 1 million adults in California. And then you need to emphasize the fact that there is hope, that things are not hopeless, and that if you get the help you need for a disease that you're suffering, that you can get better and things can improve. So generally we avoid dark messaging. It doesn't mean that we run away from it. We definitely acknowledge and address, I shouldn't say acknowledge, we definitely discuss the elevated risk, about twice as likely to commit suicide as the general population, but we focus more on that message of hope and recovery.
Okay, thank you for that.
Can I make a quick comment?
Of course,
Nelson. California law is so amazing. When the State Lottery Act was passed, it mandates that the state lottery spend a certain percentage of money on marketing. We also have statutes that actually it was it was a statutory initiative that requires that money be spent against smoking. So California requires that money be spent to tell people not to smoke, and requires that money be spent to tell people to gamble.
Only in California, right? Only
Yeah.
in California. There's a couple of very interesting points about gambling advertising in the chat. Like, for instance, in the UK, a lot of pressure being placed on by the public to get gambling advertising off the chests of football players.
Yeah.
So we haven't had that yet here in America, and yet when we go to any live sporting event, you see flooding of gambling advertising. So I think part of our strategy has to be to really look at the impact of advertising and what it does, both positive and potentially negative. It's interesting. The UK is definitely a more mature market. They have other areas. And I think it will come a time where we're going to see that. I can see that in college. I can see that even in the high school level. So Brianne, I'm going to give you an economics question. So Nelson had talked about how much these operators may or may not make. Can you shed us some data and light on what you've heard about how much money they're actually making now with this new mobile sports betting?
Well, I think when we talk about it's not really making a lot of money, I think it's all in context and relative to other forms of gambling. And Professor Rose, please jump in. But I think they talk about like the average hold rate or how much money these operators are making is roughly around 5% or so, right? That is very small margins comparative to other forms of gambling. That being said, the amount of money that is being generated through revenue, through the taxes is still very significant. I was trying to show through some of the data in my presentation just how much engagement we're getting. Again, I like to highlight a little tiny state like New Jersey. When it relates to sports betting and online gambling, they're the third largest market in the world. This is a little tiny state where we're seeing $1 billion in handle. These operators are making money. It's just that relative to other forms of gambling, their hold rate's around 5%. Now, in recent months, I've been reading that we're seeing hold rates in certain states be upwards of 13%. There is volatility here, but I think that is in the context of making money. But again, Professor Rose, please correct me if I misinterpreted that.
Well, let me say 5% is actually pretty good for gambling. When you compare it with, say, craps or blackjack, obviously lottery is a horrible bet with 15%, but a 5% win rate isn't bad, except that it's so slow that if you're doing the traditional bet on who's going to win the game, you got one bet, and then whenever the game is finally over, you win or lose. It's the first of all, the percentage that they get on parlays, which is like 16%, but it's also the speed, particularly when you get to this in-game betting. And right now it's in-game parlays. I think what's going to happen, in-game parlays are pretty good because you can have a 12-way bet where you put up $1, you can win 1,000. So now it's like a lottery. But I think we're going to have not just in-game parlays, but literally in-game betting. And we can get to whether a specific player will do something on the next play. And this leads, by the way, the question Tim brought up is the impact on athletes. You can't bribe an NFL player. They make too much money. You can bribe a college player. You also can bribe a high school player. And you might even be able to bribe an NFL player if he gets a message, I want you to run to the right on the next play, and I'm going to give you $10,000 cash. But you certainly can bribe a college player to say, it used to be win the game, but don't beat the spread. Now it can be lose the next free throw, and I'll give you $1,000 cash. I think it's extremely dangerous, and I don't see any way to control it, frankly.
Robert, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, it's funny. I was actually typing an answer to this question in chat when you brought it up. I think, just to emphasize some of the points Nelson's making. Casinos, when a casino evaluates how much money a player is worth to them, they use a formula called theoretical win. It's a mathematical formula that basically takes your average bet times your number of bets per hour times the hours that you play. And so the point of sports betting is, on a traditional wager, you may make a larger wager, you may place a larger wager, but you're only placing one or a handful of wagers when the games start 2 or 3 times a day on an NFL Sunday. Whereas at a blackjack table, you're placing 60 bets an hour, and at a slot machine, you're placing 600 bets an hour. Since it's a multiplicative formula, it's important to know that the theoretical win, the amount of money that the casino make, is really tied more to the number of wagers that you're playing, or at least as much to it. It's an equal part of the component. The other part of the question was, how can we say operators are not making money? So first of all, I think all of us will agree the operators are making money. They're making significant amounts of money, regardless of what the hold percentage is. If it's 4.5%, if it's 2.5% post EBITDA, or if you look at some of the games that have much higher hold rates, like slot machines that hold 10% and have higher rates of play, it's a question of, is it bringing more money into the gambling market? Because somebody who goes to a casino and places $500 in sports wagers may now no longer place those $500 on a table game. And this is one area where we need to talk about access, and where we need to talk about the differentiation between mobile betting versus betting in a brick and mortar casino. Mobile betting increases access. We all know that access has impacts on prevalence, has impacts on spend, has impacts on the pace at which you develop a problem. So betting that you can access from your computer, your cell phone, I'm saying mobile, but it's electronic betting. Betting that you can place from your couch while you're watching the football game, and then we amplify that by parlays and prop bets and in-game betting, that massively increases both pace and access. And if we go back to that theoretical win, because that's how much money the operators are making. Now you have that number of bets increasing and you have that pace increasing. So it's a very different conversation. If we talk about a brick and mortar casino building a sports book that accepts traditional bets, that is basically taking 3 bets a day from you on an NFL Sunday and may see you placing fewer bets on a blackjack table, as opposed to an online operator who's available on your cell phone and you can place a bet for every single play during the day, and all of the different things that fall along that spectrum. And so when we think about how much money operators are making, so much of it depends on how those operators are accepting bets. And that's going to change from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, which is probably a great segue to Brienne.
And we'll wrap on this with just a few more minutes, but that ties into this question again about fidelity, corruption, game rigging, policing these things. So, I work with a number of athletes, a number of professional sports societies that are very concerned about that. And of course, talking about to their athletes, but still ultimately, we see a lot of conspiracy theories in America, right? And one of the things that anytime you have an unusual event in any sporting event, immediately you hear right now that was rigged. Someone was on the take. And that was always that way in the 80s and 90s, but it is with every single game I hear now. So you combine that with a lot of this other kind of misinformation and kind of how people view fake news and all that. I think we're creating a really unusual potential conflict here where people really going to have a lot of questions about trusting and their faith in all of what's happening in front of them. He dropped the ball. He must be on the take. The referee screwed us over. I lost my money. And so suddenly all these emotions are, I think, accelerated to like the 10th degree. So we'll finish up here. Brienne, last words. Anything else you want to highlight there? And we'll give Professor Rhodes the last word there as well.
I think that no matter what type of format sports wagering takes, it comes with some consequences, good and bad, and it's how you address it. Being proactive is by far the best approach here. And the fact that you're coming into this potentially a lot later than 38 other jurisdictions, moving from your silo to just what you've always traditionally done here, and from reaching out to other industry operators, policymakers about what's gone well, what hasn't, and really trying to empower yourself with as much information is the best bet you can make on sports betting.
Nelson, any last words from Utah, where Nelson is?
Yeah, Utah. Well, gambling is still a state issue, although there's some federal barriers. So I personally don't think Prop 26 or 27 are going to pass. And I did write a blog about some of the problems those acts have. But California will have sports betting. Utah will never have sports betting. But the last comment I would make is the metaverse. If you want to see what the metaverse is like, if you want to see what I guess Generation Z, their world is, read Player One. The film wasn't very good, but the book is good. Read Player One, and best-selling book. He enters this world, everything is games, but change every game to gambling. And the future is you put on your headset and you're in a casino. Or I guess you could put on your headset and be a player on the team and making bets while you're playing. The world as we know it is in the process of changing. And it's funny that the people who are controlling it are not the people who actually are in the metaverse. So we've got a problem here.
All right, and I'll end with this. I actually had a reporter mention to me the other day, how do we engage political action? How do we get more people voting? And I said to him, you bet on the propositions.
Right.
Right. And it was a flippant joke, but he said, absolutely, that's how you get so many more people to bet. It was really shocking. He actually thought of that as a serious answer. It's sad, but you can bet on political elections in other countries. You can't bet them on here in California yet. So where we are at this forefront new in 2022 is we have a lot of information we're gathering. We have so much more work to be done. So this is hopefully the beginning of a regular thing that we'll be doing. We know that whatever election results happen next week, that in 2024, there will be more sports betting options on the table for review and discussions. We thank everyone for hanging in there virtually and in person and for participating today. We will have this recording available on our website for further review. Please take your time and look at our other partners' websites, gamblingandthelaw.com, calproblemgambling.org. What's your website? You have a website?
Yes.
You can Google, you can follow Brianne on Twitter, and then take a look at our UCLA gamblingprogram.org, and of course, freefromproblemgambling.org. Thank you everyone for your attention. Have a terrific weekend ahead of you. Take care and go out and vote next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I could
Bye,
throw
Justin. Bye, Robert. We're gonna log. We're gonna have a
just throw out one quick note. It's calpg.org.
Oh,
Everybody.
calpg.org. Okay.
calpg.org. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Okay.